never imagined stepping into a family. Would mean stepping into a trial I hadn't signed up for. My name is James. I married Hannah 2 years after she and Lucas had already built their small, private rhythm, a rhythm that I thought I would gently become part of. I wanted to be the steady hand, the man who offered stability and a quieter life. What I didn't expect was how quickly I would become the target of a private alliance designed to make me feel small. At first, it was subtle, a comment here about the way I set the table, a laugh there when I mentioned a plan I'd made for the weekend. Lucas, at 16, behaved like he had been deputized into her court, quick to mimic, quicker to smirk. Hannah would smile and say things like, "Oh, he's trying," as if kindness were a joke. I tried to ignore it, to be patient. New families take time to settle, I told myself. But patience has a limit, and dignity has its edge. They thought I would stay silent. Perhaps that was the cruelest assumption. It's easy to underestimate a man who chooses calm over spectacle. People confuse silence for weakness when really it can be quiet strategy. While Hannah and Lucas traded whispers that cut, I watched, listened, and cataloged. Not with bitterness, but with a clear-eyed view of what was happening in my own home. Their jokes weren't accidental. They had pattern, rhythm, and intention. Someone who molds their words into a directed weapon is someone who expects predictable reactions. The dynamic worsened in public. At family dinners and gatherings with friends, Lucas's smirks grew louder, his teasing sharper. Hannah would give me a look that invited the room to join in. Once at a barbecue, Lucas imitated my laugh and then called it Dad's weird voice, loud enough for a circle of onlookers to snicker. Hannah laughed with them, a curated laugh that left me out in the cold. Each time she made it clear, whether through tone or timing, that this was a private performance and I was the prop. What angered me wasn't the ridicule itself. It was the assumption that I would accept it for the sake of harmony. They treated respect like something negotiable, like a courtesy that could be withdrawn for amusement. I chose to respond the only way I trusted, not with theatrics, not with revenge that mirrored them, but with a quiet reclamation of my life. Their expectation that I would remain small became the very flaw I intended to correct. I began to prepare, not to humiliate, not to punish, but to reset the balance so the house would no longer be a stage where my dignity was optional. The moment came sooner than I expected. Hannah had organized a weekend, gathering with friends, co-workers, and neighbors. A perfect audience for her little performances. Lucas, of course, was by her side, whispering comments, making gestures, and trying to provoke laughter at my expense. They thought I would stay quiet, smile politely, and let the jokes land. But I had learned long ago that quiet patience is more powerful than any loud confrontation. As the room filled with chatter, laughter, and casual conversation, I observed carefully, Hannah was already in her element, commanding attention, her energy magnetic. Lucas was testing the boundaries, imitating, mocking, exaggerating. I could see the pattern. A joke, a pause for audience reaction, a glance to check if I had responded. They had rehearsed this, perhaps without consciously knowing, but it had rhythm and precision. I chose my moment when Lucas delivered a particularly pointed jab about my cooking, and the room turned to laugh. I simply smiled faintly, maintaining calm eye contact with him. I did not react verbally. I let the silence linger, let the lack of response feel heavier than any retort. Hannah noticed immediately. A subtle flicker of surprise crossed her face. She had expected a performance from me, a defensive stumble, a visible flinch. Instead, there was nothing but measured calm. I stood slowly, allowing attention to naturally gravitate toward me. Hannah's energy, which had been sharp and commanding, suddenly encountered a wall of composure she could not push through. I recounted a few moments, gently, factually, where respect had been sidelined in the house. Not in anger, not in mockery, but with quiet precision. The room shifted. The audience sensed the change in tone. Hannah tried to interrupt once, but my calm, steady presence left no room for disruption. Lucas froze slightly, his grin faltering. The laughter that had once buoyed their confidence now ebbed. The unspoken power dynamic in the room had tilted, Hannah realizing her previous control was slipping, attempted to regain the spotlight with charm and humor, but it landed differently this time. Her audience saw the contrast between her theatrics and my composed clarity. I finished with a simple, direct line. This house isn't a stage for mockery. Respect isn't optional. No flourish, no yelling, just truth. The room absorbed it. Hannah's smile tightened. Lucas's smirk faded. For the first time, they understood that the quiet man could wield authority just as effectively as the loud one, without losing dignity, without theatrics, without escalation. By the end of the evening, the pattern had shifted. Hannah and Lucas no longer felt free to mock or orchestrate performances at my expense. I had not humiliated them. I had restored balance, my patience and quiet. Strategy had done what words alone could, not made my presence undeniable, my boundaries clear and my dignity unshakable. The following days were quiet, but the change was palpable. Hannah no longer made the small public jabs that had once been routine, and Lucas seemed to reconsider every comment before delivering it. It wasn't that they were afraid. It was that they understood finally that I would not participate in the drama they tried to orchestrate. The house, once a stage for their private performances, became a space where mutual respect and awareness replaced mockery and whispers. At dinner, one evening, Hannah attempted a playful joke about a minor mishap from work. I listened, smiled faintly, and responded with calm commentary, neutral and factual. The room felt different. The tension replaced by subtle acknowledgement. Lucas, too, refrained from snide remarks, his youthful audacity tempered by the quiet authority I had established. The lesson had been absorbed. I would not be diminished nor Would I allow private theatrics to dominate the household? I reflected on what had happened at the gathering. It wasn't about dominating them or retaliating in kind. It was about presence, consistency, and the strength of measured action. By staying calm, by observing carefully, and by asserting boundaries without anger or spectacle, I had created a shift that was unmistakable. Respect had been restored, but in a way that allowed dignity to remain intact for all parties. Hannah approached me later that evening. Her voice was softer, her tone careful. "James, I see your point." She said it. Wasn't an apology. It wasn't an act of submission. It was acknowledgement. She had recognized that the previous pattern, mocking, performing, testing, limits, was no longer sustainable. For Lucas, it was even clearer. The stepson, who had once treated the home as a theater of private jokes, now learned that boundaries were absolute in that. His actions carried weight. In the end, the strategy was simple, but effective. I did not raise my voice. I did not humiliate, and I did not seek revenge. I allowed the natural consequences of observation, consistency, and quiet authority to take their course. Hannah and Lucas had assumed silence meant submission, that patience meant weakness. They had been wrong. The home returned to balance. Laughter returned, yes, but it was genuine, not orchestrated, at the expense of someone else. Conversations became respectful, interactions measured, and the household operated without the constant tension that had once shadowed every gathering. That weekend and every day since reminded me of one essential truth. When others attempt to diminish you, control you, or exploit your patience, the strongest response is often the quietest. Respect, once asserted firmly and consistently, commands acknowledgement without drama. I had found my own way to fight back, not through conflict, not through spectacle, but through presence, dignity, and unwavering clarity. And that, above all, changed everything.